In my Slow is Beautiful, when I talk about new visions of community, leisure, and joie de vivre, that's what success is. To be able to savor your life, to enjoy what you're doing, to spend time with friends, to be able to sit out in your backyard and watch the birds. All of this stuff, it's good for you, and it's good for the culture, and it's good for the planet.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson. You're listening to Cecile Andrews playing Give Me the Simple Life, and she sure knows the way. She's the author of The Circle of Simplicity, Return to the Good Life, and Slow is Beautiful, New Visions of Community, Leisure, and Joie de Vivre. And more recently, Less is More, Embracing Simplicity for a Healthy Planet, a Caring Economy, and Lasting Happiness. Cecile, we want to hear more.
All
Would
right.
you join me?
Okay.
What a delight to have you share your music with us. Thank you.
Well, this is what you get to do when you have the simple life. You get to play your flute.
Well, you've been encouraging people to live simply for decades here.
Yeah.
How did you get started? Tell us about it.
Well, I was an English major, and I loved Thoreau. And then I did something with the Quakers, and I discovered simplicity. And it's common sense. Essentially, it's saying what's important, what matters. And you realize one of the big things that matters is having time for the things you want to do.
Yes,
like
yes,
playing your
yes,
flute.
yes.
And so you start thinking about time, and you realize you're working a lot of hours in order to buy all this stuff. And so if you cut back on your stuff, you can save money, and maybe you can work less. And so that's what I did. And then I was at a community college. I was an administrator, and I put on the classes. And so I put on one on simplicity in 1989, and only 4 people came, so we canceled it. But then 3 years later, in 92, we put it on, and we had 175 people come.
It was an idea whose time had come.
Yeah,
People were ready for
exactly.
that.
And I introduced the idea of the simplicity circle that people need in order to change, to come together to talk. That we can't just do all this stuff alone.
So what happens in a simplicity circle?
Well, it's like people come and they tell their story. And people talk about, well, what I want to do this week is I want to learn to, go and borrow a cup of sugar from my neighbor. And then the next week they come back and they talk about what they did. And people say, oh, wow. And so it's like you get, all the research these days, which is just common sense, shows that you become like the people you're around.
Okay.
And so if you really want social change, you've got to create a way that people can hang out with people they want to be like.
Sure, that makes sense, because you've got models, but you've also got feedback.
Yes.
How are you doing?
Yes.
And they've got
Right.
ideas you hadn't
Right.
considered that may help solve problems.
Exactly.
Aha. Oh, wonderful.
So you don't feel like weird. Like, you say to somebody, oh, no, I'm not going to that sale. They think you're weird. But if you're around people who understand, you're reinforced. And we really need that reinforcement in this kind of culture.
Well, you're going counter to most of the messages that our
Exactly.
culture is giving us.
Exactly. And not just the messages to consume, the message to achieve, the message to be somebody, that success is something you've done. And really, in my Slow is Beautiful, when I talk about new visions of community, leisure, and joie de vivre, that's what success is. To be able to savor your life, to enjoy what you're doing, to spend time with friends, to be able to sit out in your backyard and watch the birds. All of this stuff, it's good for you, and it's good for the culture, and it's good for the planet. But we don't have time when we're rushing around.
It seems to me that we are constantly being distracted. I would imagine that, with pulled in a lot of directions, and things become more complex.
Yeah.
I would imagine that, when I first heard of the simplicity movement, it's like there's such an appeal to thinking of all the clutter, mental clutter and
Yes.
physical clutter
Yes. Yeah.
that you don't need to have in your life.
Right. Right.
So you've created those circles
Yeah.
and support a lot of people
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah.
And tell us what you've done in your own life. That's an example of. I mean, I'm thinking of what you've done with your house and your life.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I started reading about simplicity, but then I started meeting a lot of people who were practicing it. And one of the things a lot of them did is that they decided they didn't want to have a career that they devoted themselves to. And as I say, I was a community college administrator. I had gone back to Stanford and got my doctorate in education, and I thought, well, I'll be a community college president someday. But I realized that as you move up in community college administration, you have to become a duller person. You can't wave your arms, you can't say what you want. So I started thinking, and I was walking around, Green Lake is close to here, and I was walking with a friend, and she said, Cecile, why don't you think of your work on simplicity as your form of art, and that artists are always willing to sacrifice for their art? So I came home and I said to my husband, I'm an artist, I have to quit my job. And so I did quit my full-time administrative job. I teach, I write books, I do workshops, I work in a community, but I can afford to do that not only because we live simply, but because the other thing we did with our house, I met other people who were renting out parts of their house. So what we did, because we have a big house, but we rented out the top, it was a separate apartment, created a separate apartment in the basement, and we've done that for the last several years, which has given us a lot more flexibility. And then my husband wrote a book on Bill Gates, and he got a big advance. And so we thought, what should we do with this money? We'll pay our house off. Now, our financial advisor said, oh, no, that's the worst thing you can do. You want to have. We said, no, what we want is security, not more money. So we paid our house off. But again, it was all this is going against the flow of this culture.
Yeah.
And one of the nice things about being identified with the simplicity movement is, like, I used to kind of feel bad because all my friends had their kitchens remodeled and we hadn't done that, and it was like, oh God, we'd never do that. And then I thought, nobody expects me to do it. They think I'm living simply.
That's right. If you're living simply,
yes.
It doesn't have to be up to the latest.
Right. I can wear what I want. I can wear old clothes. I can wear the same thing. Nobody expects anything from me. And I thought, wow, that is such a freedom. Yeah. That, because otherwise we tend to look at, how are these people doing? Oh, Cecile has to take in boarders. She must not be doing well. But no, you've got people living in your house. So it's been great. And it's very hard, I think, to go in a different direction without, again, support. And so that's what these simplicity circles help us do. And but the important thing, though, is simplicity has been focused on personal change, which we want.
Sure.
But we're really trying, because personal change will only go so far.
That's true.
We want to change the whole culture. And what we need to do is create a culture that we're all in this together, instead of the culture, every man for himself. And you compete and you get yours before the other person does. So simplicity, you have to begin with personal change, but you want to take it to the wider community. So we began to work on the Take Back Your Time movement so that we could do some of the things they're doing in Europe. They have 4 to 6 weeks vacation in Europe.
Wonderful.
They have, parental leave. They have more vacations. All the research shows that this is very good for health, for productivity. So we actually work on the national level. We have a bill in Congress to guarantee Americans 1 week of vacation.
That's it's stunning to me how backward America is in that regard, and that people are working more hours now than they did a decade ago on average.
Yes. If we Take Back Your Time Day is October 24th, and if Americans didn't work starting then until January 1st, we would be working about the same as the Europeans. In other words, we work about 9 weeks more. Although, since the financial crisis, that's shifted a teeny bit. But nonetheless, what's in place. So we talk about simplicity, we talk about the Take Back Your Time movement, but now we have another movement, the Gross National Happiness movement. And this is from Bhutan, the little country that decided, let's not evaluate everything in terms of GDP and gross
Which is
domestic
gross
product.
domestic product, which is income, economy,
Right.
money changing hands.
It's essentially, you're right, it's just money going through. So something bad helps the economy.
I mean, that's because
Yes.
gross domestic, number of cancers that get treated
Yeah.
by healthcare
Yeah.
professionals and
Exactly.
Superfund sites are
Yeah.
also part of the gross
Right.
domestic. Okay,
Right.
good.
So we're saying gross national happiness because Bhutan did this. But what they did is they developed a whole lot of criteria, different ways to evaluate. So you evaluate in terms of your community involvement, in terms of your time work balance, you're in terms of environment, in terms of your feeling of security. And so Victoria, BC, has become the first gross national happiness city in Canada. So Seattle, we're already working with our city council, is working to become the first gross national happiness city in the United States.
And what does it mean to be a city of gross? Yeah.
What we want to do is get the city council to declare that we're a city. That's what they did in Victoria. And we want to give, this is what they did in Victoria, a survey that's given every year that people fill out so we can evaluate these other issues about community involvement, about time, about wellness. And so then what you do is that you also encourage organizations to use this as a way to think about what they're doing. So in a way, it's getting people, we're talking about the same things, but Americans don't have a long attention span. You have to keep coming up with new ways to get their attention. So we've gone to, some people love simplicity, but other people will say to me, this is my favorite, they'll say, what's that thing you're involved in, that self-deprivation movement?
Yes.
So they just see it that way, but some people love simplicity. Well, then other people will be, they love this take back your time idea. How can I take back my time? And then others like the gross national happiness.
Well, yeah, I can get that those are, I mean, they're all related. I certainly can understand that with the simplicity movement, people feel like, to choose to live in a smaller space or have fewer things would indeed be a burden or suffering or deprivation.
Right.
Except for the fact that if you've chosen it,
Yes.
it's your choice.
Your choice.
And nobody made you do it.
Right.
But what you're predicating change here on, Cecile, is happiness.
Right.
What makes you happy, rather than we should use less oil.
Right.
We should bicycle instead of drive a car.
Exactly.
I mean,
yes, this is so important. And finally, there's a lot of research on happiness. And there are two things that are very, very clear. And this one I love, that after a certain point, more money does not make people happier. I mean, that's very clear.
after raising money up to a certain level.
But you have to have it to a certain point. Poor people are not happier.
Yes.
They need to be up. They need more money to be happy. But after a certain point, more money does not contribute to happiness. And in fact, it can subtract from happiness because it distracts you from the important thing, which is social ties. Social ties are the chief ingredient in happiness. And this is related to another fact I love that I just discovered in the last couple of years, and they've done a lot of research, that the biggest predictor for the health of a nation, as measured in terms of longevity, is the gap between the rich and the poor. That the bigger the gap, the lower your longevity. And so now Europe, particularly the Scandinavian nations, where they have a much smaller gap, they have longer lives than we do. And it's not just the poor person who suffers and brings down the average. The rich person also doesn't have the same longevity because you have a society in which it's a cutthroat society. It's not a caring society. So we've got to figure out, how do you create a caring society? And one of those is, because this helps you with social ties, one of the things is this lowering this wealth gap. So this little idea of living simply you can do something. It's not something you have to work on and never get to. We can simplify our lives right away.
Sure.
But everybody, I think, wants to feel they're making a difference in the larger culture. So this gross national happiness is allowing us to work on another kind of level.
I want to go back for just a second when you're talking about the gap.
Right.
And also that more money at a certain point, people reach a certain level of maybe security is a word that you used.
Right.
And I think that America seems to be particularly lacking in that. We do not have, say, health security, medical security.
Right.
We do not have the kind of safety nets that I would expect Scandinavia does.
Yes, definitely.
So that if you're looking at that happiness, gross national happiness, you're really looking at the potential need for some very fundamental big changes.
Right. And all of these changes say that profit is not the most important thing. People and the planet are. Yes, people need to make profit, but first everything has to take into account how is it going to affect people? How is it going to affect the planet? And that's the caring part. Because if all it is profit, that means money is the only thing that matters. And so what you have, if you have a culture, because we're a very, very individualistic culture. So our message was never that your security is in other people. So if you have a culture in which other people are your security, then money and profit aren't as important. But since that's not what we have, we look to our security to profit and money.
Oh, yes. If I have a big enough bank account, then I can buy the things I need to get the medical care or whatever care, to get the caring I need. Interesting. Instead of...
So if we try to switch this to, no, social ties, community, and caring are the true sources of security, then people can begin to see that they don't have to constantly run to get that money. And that's what we do, which takes away your time. So we're creating a positive circle instead of this vicious circle that we're in.
On the practical level, you may not have finished your thought there. I'm thinking about, we've been encouraged to have all of our little separate houses and all of our separate lives and all of our separate automobiles and so on. How do you, maybe it's easier in the city than in the countries because you can just go down, you're creating neighborhoods, talk about how we do that on a practical level.
Well, I realize that it's not just, you want friends, you want family, but there's something about feeling you belong where you live. So one of the, we have this sustainable community group in our neighborhood that we work on. One of our goals is the Stop and Chat project.
Stop and Chat?
Stop and Chat.
Okay.
And so we tell people, go out and don't, when we got this from Larry David and Curb Your Enthusiasm. He hates stop and chats. He's so curmudgeonly. It's like, oh my God, if I see that person, I'm crossing the street. So we say, no, go out and you see your neighbors, stop and chat. And so when my husband comes home now, if he's late, he used to get in trouble, but now he comes in, he says, I've had 3 stop and chats, and he's off the hook. And it's so interesting to see how this level of neighborliness is so important to your well-being. And it doesn't seem like it's important. So we spend a lot of time trying to build community. We organize, in fact, we've got a simplicity group, we've got a climate change group, but I realize that it doesn't matter what group you form. I can have, because I'm a big mystery reader, I can have a mystery book group, and that could be as significant as a climate change group because you're building social capital, you're building social ties. And when people have social ties, partly they're more caring, and so they won't just care for each other. They'll also care for the planet. They'll also care for the larger culture. It's like caring is this innate kind of ability that we've ignored, that we need to encourage. And in fact, George Lakoff, the Berkeley linguist, says that the way you bring about social change is not giving people facts about what's wrong, but you evoke empathy. And how do you evoke empathy? You do it by bringing people together, talking, by telling your story, by inviting people into your house. So you do this and they become open to these other values of caring. So the subtitle to my slow is beautiful, Community, Leisure, and Joie de Vivre. The joie de vivre, the French phrase for the joy of living, that's what we want. This sense of, oh, wow, I'm glad to be alive. I look forward to my day. This is great. But to have that, you need community. But to have community, you need leisure. And leisure is something we've totally lost.
It's only
in
for
this
the wealthy.
culture.
It's only for the folks, you know, who can
They
pay
don't
for their
even,
leisure.
they don't even have it anymore either.
Really?
Because everybody is going too fast. It's not how much time you have even. It's how you use that time. You know, can you move slowly so that you can stop and talk to people, that you can enjoy what you're doing, that you have time to reflect. And in fact, there was just a New York Times article talking about how the fact that that we're always using some digital device.
Yes, yes.
That we fill up our time, like if we're standing in a line, if we're waiting for the pot to boil, that we've lost these periods where we reflect or we savor, and that what we're doing is, it affects our memory, which we all know, our memory isn't as good, but it decreases your sense of enjoyment and also your ability to even think deeper thoughts or be creative, because you're taking that away, that downtime away.
Yeah, I mean, if we're always
Yeah.
getting stimulated and so on, it's like there's not a level of quiet. It has to kind of wait for things to
Yeah.
settle a little before
Yeah.
something can arise. I find that
Yeah.
my walks in the woods, or even
Yes.
washing dishes. I
Yes.
never thought of this as the reason why. A reason not to have a dishwashing
Yes.
machine.
Yes.
It's because that task
Exactly.
lets things calm down.
And that's what we discovered when we moved here. We didn't have a dishwasher, and then you don't want to go shop for a dishwasher. That's really boring. And we discovered that we loved. We have our bird feeder out in front of our window. We stand and wash the dishes. And then I realized that when my sister and I grew up, we were always singing when we did the dishes. You don't sing over a dishwasher.
No,
So
no, that's
so
true.
and so there is all these things that slowing down doesn't mean like just plodding along, but it really is savoring. I think is the best word.
That's a good word.
A lot of people are putting a lot of emphasis on food, and in fact, Slow is Beautiful. I was inspired by the slow food movement because what you have, they're saying, you're not supposed to be eating with one hand while you're driving. You're supposed to be talking with your friends and eating good food, enjoying yourself. And I realized what it was is the image of the joyful community. That's what we need to work for, and that's what will also get people to treat the earth differently. And then I saw this quote by Saint-Exupéry, the guy who did The Little Prince.
Yes.
He said, if you want people to build you a boat, you don't just bring them and give them the wood and the tools and the plans. You teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. That you have to give a vision. And my vision is a joyful community.
Right where you are. I mean, what I see is that you're building it right where you live. I mean, partly in your house with other people, and partly your neighbors, the chats.
Right.
But you are also, in your regional area, you're also building that.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yes. Well, we have all these, they're called sustainable neighborhoods, but they're Sustainable Ballard, Sustainable Green Lake, and we're all together in something that's called Sustainable Communities all over Puget Sound, which is scallops, which is so perfect.
Perfect for Puget Sound, yes.
And it's also, we're working with the transition town movement that's come from England. But this says that, you get to know your neighborhood, but then you also join together to go to your city hall, to get your city hall to make some changes. And then you can join together and you can go to your state legislature. So it really is the bottom up of social change. And it's very exciting to be a part of this kind of a movement that is really meant to be, joyful, to say, what you want in life is to come together and enjoy each other. Because a lot of the stuff we've done, and it has had to be that way, you've had to focus on the negative. But in fact, one statistic they found that if environmentalists spend too much time telling about what's wrong, people compensate by going shopping.
Oh.
The very thing we don't want them to do.
Which says then that, okay, what you're saying is that if we dwell on peak oil and disaster and collapse and so on, we need to know that those things are moving, climate change.
Yeah.
But if we dwell on those, it's insufficient.
Yes.
You can't
Yes.
live there.
Right. Because some of us will respond to the bad news. And we're the ones who like to be in these movements. But we're trying to think of how do we bring the people who kind of like, I'm not so sure. If they see us as these unpleasant people who are just ranting and raving all the time, which I've certainly been a lot of times, they're not going to join our movement.
No.
And we do this bannering right above this highway next to us. We do it every Tuesday morning. It's basically against the Iraq War. Well, we've been doing this for many years, and we just enjoy each other so much. And so it's really funny because people will see as they drive underneath it, because it's all part of an overpass, they'll see, war is doing such and such, but they'll see this group of people laughing and smiling above the bad news.
Fabulous image.
And so it's like, oh, this is the way you change things. You come together and you laugh and enjoy yourself. And then you'll go out and you'll treat the planet differently. You'll treat people differently. You'll work for policies that are caring instead of just, But I've had to learn that. I've often been the kind of person, and I don't think it works.
That's a great story, because certainly we'll attract more flies with honey.
Yes.
Here.
Yes.
And the thing that I hadn't thought of here in our last minute,
Yeah.
If there's anything a little precious, is how that caring can actually extend from beyond our social ties into the more than human planet.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
that's a linkage that I think many aren't necessarily making.
Yes.
I mean, how can we have more fun if we're having celebrations, but the toxins are still coming? It's like...
Exactly. Yeah.
You're talking about ultimately that caring gets extended.
It's extended out. And it's also, I think of it as a culture of connection, that we're connected with ourselves, we're living our values, we know our values, we're connected with each other, we're connected with the planet, and we're connected to the universe. And, when I sit outside and, watching my sheets dry or the plants moving in the wind, I think, the universe is speaking to me as I sit out here. And so it is connection from all these different levels, I think. Don't you?
I do. And it takes that quiet that you talk about to be able to feel it again.
Yeah.
I think it's built into ourselves and has been sort of blocked out by our current culture. This has been just a treasure of a conversation with you. Thank you. I hope that I'm really pleased to have the notion of joy be central to the social change. Thank you for bringing that along with simplicity to all of us.
Good. Well, thank you for coming. Yeah.
You're watching Peak Moment, locally reliant living for challenging times. I'd say joy's the way to go. My guest is Cecile Andrews. Join us next time.